Carl Jung once described a psychological shift so intense that it shook even him. He saw it happen again and again in people who at first glance looked fragile and kind, often the empaths, the ones who carried other people's pain quietly. But when something inside them finally snapped, they became what I'd call the awakened ones. These weren't just broken souls trying to survive. They were people who in Jung's terms had started to integrate their shadow, the darker hidden side of their personality. And when that happened, they didn't just change their own lives. They challenged everything we thought we knew about how the human mind works. Jung noticed a repeating pattern in the patients who came to his clinic in Zurich. Many of them had grown up in chaos, alcoholic parents, explosive households, unfaithful partners, or families weighed down by dysfunction. These were the people who had learned to absorb everyone else's pain like sponges. They apologized for existing, blamed themselves for their sadness, and kept carrying the emotional weight of others. He called them emotional shock absorbers, the ones who kept entire families or relationships from falling apart, even at the cost of their own well-being. But here's where Jung's findings became unsettling. These people weren't simply crushed by abuse. They were observing it. Jung realized that many empaths had been unconsciously keeping mental records of every slight, every betrayal, every outburst they had endured. They didn't write this down in notebooks, but in their minds they built something like a strategist's map. They knew what triggered the people around them. They memorized fears, weak spots, patterns of behavior. And they did it with frightening precision. For years they never acted on this knowledge. But when life pushed them beyond their breaking point, it was as if a switch flipped. Jung described sitting across from patients who weren't just victims. They were highly perceptive minds hiding in plain sight. They weren't creating new ideas like inventors, but they were masters at emotional archaeology, digging into people's hidden wounds just by paying attention. To test this, Jung sometimes introduced strangers into therapy sessions. He wouldn't tell his patients anything about these new faces. Yet within minutes, the empaths could describe these people's childhood struggles, their relationship habits, even insecurities about their careers. Their accuracy was shockingly high. It wasn't magic. They weren't psychic. What most people dismiss as intuition was actually something else: data gathering. They noticed tiny facial movements, subtle tones in someone's voice, shifts in posture, clues most of us overlook. Their brains processed those details at lightning speed, connecting them into a bigger picture. What Jung discovered was simple but radical: empaths don't just feel emotions more strongly. They read human behavior like a living map. Society often calls them too sensitive or too emotional, but in reality, they're running one of the most advanced psychological systems we know, the ability to see truth where others only see the surface. Empaths often learn to quiet themselves. They second-guess what they see, doubt what they feel, and apologize for noticing things others pretend not to notice. But here's the truth: when you stop speaking it, the truth doesn't vanish. It builds up. For many of Jung's patients, it had been building for decades. Jung noticed something powerful. Empaths don't lose their minds because they feel too deeply. They begin to break down because the world keeps telling them their feelings are wrong. What looked like a nervous breakdown from the outside was, in reality, a breakthrough. It was the moment all the hidden parts of themselves broke through the surface. And there was always one spark that set it off: betrayal. Not a casual disappointment, but betrayal by the very person they had trusted and protected the most. Over and over, Jung saw the same story unfold. A partner's affair, a friend's manipulation, a family member's deceit. The pain wasn't only in the act itself, it was in realizing that deep down, they had sensed it all along and chosen to ignore it. True to their nature, the empath didn't confront it right away. They stayed quiet, swallowed their anger, tried harder to fix what was broken. They blamed themselves. They worked harder to be the perfect partner, child, or friend. But then came what I call the clarity event. The point where their gift for recognizing patterns became stronger than their need to believe the best in people. Jung understood this as a form of shadow integration, the moment the unconscious rises to the surface under unbearable pressure. Here's what shocked everyone around them. Instead of collapsing into tears or shouting in rage, the empath became calm. Strangely calm. Abusers expected drama. They were ready for screaming and chaos. What they faced instead was something colder, sharper. The empath began to speak. Not wildly, but with unsettling precision. They laid out the facts, every lie, every inconsistency, every wound that had been covered up. They didn't exaggerate. They didn't lash out. They revealed. Jung compared it to surgery. Not revenge, but diagnosis. Like a surgeon pointing to each organ that had rotted and preparing to remove it. This clarity wasn't cruelty. It was truth finally unleashed after years of silence. Ancient wisdom had warned of this moment. There is nothing more powerful than someone who finally trusts their own perception. For Jung, this was shadow integration at its rawest form. The shadow wasn't evil or destructive. It was simply the parts of the self that had been denied, intelligence muted, instincts ignored, strength suppressed. When empaths stopped burying these qualities and allowed them to surface, they became whole. The most unsettling part. Once this shift happened, it was permanent. They didn't fall back into old habits of apologizing and people-pleasing. They no longer begged for validation. They trusted what they saw and acted on it. They became empaths who could not be manipulated. The changes went beyond the mind. Within months, Jung saw these patients leave toxic marriages, step away from destructive families, and rebuild their lives with strategic clarity. They still cared deeply, but now they were selective about where their care went. They learned to protect their energy like it was sacred currency. And other people noticed. Those who had once taken advantage of them grew uneasy in their presence. No one could explain it, but everyone could feel it. Jung described it as the predator's instinct. Those who thrive on manipulation can sense when their old tricks no longer work. They avoided these transformed empaths the way shadows avoid the sun. Jung once wrote, "The awakened empath doesn't need to announce their power. Others can feel it in their bones." And he was right. Many of us have felt it too, that moment people started treating us differently, sensing the change before we ever put it into words. What disturbed Jung most was not only what he saw in his patients, but what he recognized in himself. Jung was deeply sensitive. He knew what it was like to feel too much, to see beneath the surface when others refused to look. These cases forced him to confront a question he never fully answered: what happens to society when empaths stop being emotional sponges and start using their perception as strategy? What Jung saw in these people left him restless at night. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. Their businesses flourished because they could sense what clients really wanted before a single word was spoken. Their new relationships were strong because they spotted unhealthy dynamics instantly. And their choices, whether personal or professional, became razor-sharp because they trusted their intuition completely. Here's what chilled Jung the most: these empaths hadn't lost their sensitivity. They had perfected it. They were both deeply compassionate and sharply strategic. In theory, they could have turned manipulative themselves. They had the skill set to dismantle anyone who once hurt them. But they didn't. They chose restraint. Instead of revenge, they simply cut ties with toxic people and walked away. Jung called them integrated empaths. People who had combined sensitivity with clarity, feeling with boundaries. They could see through deception yet no longer craved approval from the deceivers. In his private writings, Jung admitted he felt both awe and fear. I have seen something both beautiful and terrible, an individual who can see straight through manipulation, yet remains untouched by it. If you've ever reached that point where you can read people clearly but don't need their validation anymore, you know the power in the phrase, I see you, but I don't need you. The ripple effect of these transformations was staggering. Families that once leaned on the empath as the emotional dumping ground began to unravel. Alcoholic relatives had to confront their addictions without someone constantly absorbing the fallout. Depressed family members could no longer rely on the empath for endless validation. Manipulative siblings lost their favorite target. The dysfunction collapsed not because the empath fought it, but because they stopped enabling it. Jung recognized this as the empath's mirror effect. Integrated empaths didn't have to confront people directly. Their very presence acted like a mirror, reflecting hidden issues back at others. Healthy people felt strengthened around them. Toxic people felt exposed, unsettled, almost allergic to their company. When Jung placed these awakened empaths in the same room as other patients, the results shook him. Within minutes, they could identify someone's deepest wounds and even predict what kind of therapy would help. Their accuracy was beyond what Jung himself could achieve with years of training. This forced him into an ethical dilemma. If empaths could naturally reach this level of insight, what did it mean for the future of therapy? So he began studying the transformation more closely, creating what could be called an integration observation protocol. He tracked how empaths moved through predictable stages after betrayal. Stage 1 was recognition. They stopped dismissing their anger, intelligence, and boundaries as flaws. They began to see these traits for what they really were, essential parts of themselves. Stage 2 was integration. Here, they brought together both their light and their shadow. They learned they could be endlessly kind to those who deserved it, and piercingly exact with those who didn't. Stage 3 was application. This was the stage Jung found most fascinating. The integrated empath didn't just defend themselves anymore. They became builders, psychological architects. They could step into a room, read the dynamics instantly, and navigate with uncanny precision. Manipulation couldn't stick to them because they recognized it before it had a chance to work. What amazed Jung most was that these people didn't lose their ability to love. They didn't become cold or cynical. They became immune to abuse while keeping their capacity for genuine connection intact. In his notes he wrote, "I have observed compassion fused with wisdom. These are among the most psychologically powerful individuals I have ever encountered." For Jung, the final stage of the empath's transformation was what he described as a return to service. These individuals didn't grow cold or detached. Instead, they became deliberate with their compassion. They shared their abilities where it mattered most, often guiding other empaths toward the same transformation. Over time, this created what Jung saw as networks of emotionally resilient people who could no longer be broken by the same patterns that once destroyed them. The ripple effects of his work still echo. Jung came to believe that empaths weren't weak, fragile, or sick. They were, in many ways, evolutionarily advanced. People born into societies that had no idea how to use their gifts except to exploit them. He stopped framing sensitivity as a disorder to treat and began to see it as a capability worth protecting and studying. But he also saw the dark side. If an empath awakened without a strong ethical core, the same skills that allowed them to heal could just as easily be used to manipulate. That's why he developed what I'd call the ethical integration model, noting how true transformation required grounding, so the power was channeled into truth and restoration rather than control. Because of this danger, Jung guarded his findings closely. He scattered them across private journals, never publishing the complete account during his lifetime. He feared what might happen if someone discovered how to deliberately trigger these awakenings for the wrong reasons. Yet, in his final reflections, Jung admitted something beautiful. Those who completed this journey lived out their days as balanced warriors. Gentle to those who earned it, unshakable against those who threatened it. He saw them as a glimpse of what humanity could become, people able to feel everything without collapsing under it, to see clearly without becoming bitter, and to love without erasing themselves. Late in his career, Jung wrote that the empath's path isn't about hardening or shutting down. It's about moving from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. They don't end up less empathic, they become perfectly empathic. His last warning to future psychologists was simple: never underestimate someone who has learned to fully trust their own perception. In his words, the awakened empath wasn't just healed, they represented psychology's next great evolution. Modern research has only confirmed what Jung saw in his patients. Empaths who go through shadow integration become nearly impossible to gaslight because they trust their inner compass absolutely. They can't be manipulated because they spot the game before it starts. They can't be broken because they've already lived through collapse and rebuilt stronger. And that's why Jung's case studies remain so relevant. Every empath eventually faces a defining moment, the betrayal that forces a choice between staying in victimhood or stepping into sovereignty. The question isn't if they'll reach the breaking point. It's whether they'll integrate their shadow consciously, or let it consume them. Most, Jung noted, choose integration. They don't turn cruel. They become precise. They don't lose their hearts. They finally grow spines. The integrated empath is what Jung called love with boundaries, a person who still cares deeply but refuses to sacrifice themselves in the process. These individuals don't become different people. They become the truest version of themselves, the version that was hidden beneath years of conditioning. Every empath carries this potential inside them. It usually takes betrayal to unlock it, but once it happens, they become psychologically untouchable. Jung once wrote, "The empath's greatest tragedy isn't their sensitivity, it's how long they wait to honor it." So remember where all of this began. Jung's description of a transformation so shocking he called it one of the most terrifying shifts in human nature. These weren't isolated cases. They revealed something fundamental about empathy itself. Empaths aren't born as victims. They are born powerful. Society simply teaches them to bury that power until something finally wakes it up. Empaths were never weak. They were powerful from the beginning, taught only to hide that power in order to fit in. So when they finally reach their breaking point, they're not collapsing. They're awakening to the strength that was inside them all along. Jung's notes make it clear, manipulators fear this truth. The kindest people are often the strongest, because kindness without strength isn't kindness at all, it's an open door for abuse. The awakened empaths Jung documented are living proof of evolution in motion. People who can feel everything, see everything, and still choose with complete clarity. For decades Jung studied men and women who appeared fragile, until a single moment flipped everything. What he discovered is that the empath's path isn't about becoming less sensitive, it's about becoming sensitive with awareness. That awareness, that conscious choice, is what transforms victims into forces of nature. And here's the most beautiful part, they never lost their ability to love. They simply learned to direct it inward as well as outward, to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others. So if you're an empath, remember Jung's essential lesson. Your sensitivity is not your weakness. It's your weapon. And the day you learn to wield it with intention is the day you step into your true power. Not power to harm the innocent, but power to stand against anyone who would exploit your gifts. That's exactly what the world needs now, empaths who know their worth, trust their perceptions, and refuse to dim their light to make others comfortable. Jung's research leaves us with a single question: transformation is inevitable, but will you step into it consciously, or wait until life forces it upon you? If you're ready to claim it, say it aloud, I choose conscious transformation. Because the truth is simple, the world doesn't need more broken empaths. It needs awakened ones. And Jung's work proves something extraordinary: the empath will awaken. The only question is, will you command that power, or will you let it command you?